Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and fellow citizens, thank you for being here today. I want to begin with a simple but urgent truth. Something very serious is about to hit the United States. And the tragedy is not that it is unavoidable, but that it is the direct result of choices we have made, choices in our politics, our economy, and our foreign policy. If we do not confront these realities now with clarity and courage, the costs will be immense, not only for us, but for generations to come. The breaking of America's social contract is not just an abstract academic observation. It is a lived reality for millions of citizens who feel abandoned by the very system that promised opportunity and fairness. When I speak of a broken social contract, I mean that the fundamental understanding between the government and its people, that hard work will be rewarded, that every citizen will have a fair chance to succeed, and that public institutions will protect the vulnerable has been systematically eroded over the past 4 decades. This erosion has not happened overnight. It has been the product of policy choices, economic models that prioritize profit over people, and a political culture that caters to special interests rather than the common good. The result is visible everywhere: rising poverty rates, declining trust in institutions, and a generation of young Americans who no longer believe the future will be brighter than the past. Let's consider the evidence. Wages for ordinary workers have remained largely stagnant since the late 1970s, while productivity and corporate profits have soared. This means that the wealth created by modern technology, by globalization, and by America's workers has not flowed back to them, but has instead accumulated in the hands of a narrow elite. At the same time, the costs of basic necessities, education, healthcare, housing have skyrocketed, leaving families squeezed and young people shackled with debt before they even start their professional lives. Can a country really call itself the land of opportunity when a child's zip code and family income determine their entire life trajectory? That is not a rhetorical question. It is the heart of the crisis. We must face the uncomfortable truth that America has become one of the most unequal societies in the advanced world. The top 1% controls more wealth than the entire middle class combined. Millions live paycheck to paycheck, one medical emergency or one missed rent payment away from disaster. This is not just about numbers and charts. It is about human lives, about dignity, about the crushing anxiety of a mother wondering if she can afford her child's insulin, or a student working 3 jobs just to pay for textbooks. The social contract is not some theoretical ideal. It is the fabric of trust that holds a nation together. And when that fabric frays, societies weaken and democracies fall. What makes this moment particularly alarming is the growing sense of disillusionment across the population. Polls consistently show declining confidence in Congress, the presidency, the courts, the media, in every major institution of American life. People no longer believe the system is fair, and they are not wrong. When billionaires can pour unlimited money into politics, when corporations avoid taxes while ordinary families shoulder the burden, when public services are slashed to fund endless wars abroad, how can anyone feel that the system is working for them? The perception of injustice is not only corrosive, it is explosive. History teaches us that when inequality becomes entrenched, when people feel excluded from prosperity, the result is political instability, extremism, and even social collapse. Here is the hook we cannot ignore. This is not just a matter of economics. It is a matter of democracy itself. If the American people come to believe that their voices no longer matter, that their votes no longer change anything, that their futures are predetermined by elites who write the rules to serve themselves, then democracy is at risk. The breaking of the social contract is the breaking of democracy. It is the point where citizens turn away from the ballot box and look instead to anger, resentment, and radical alternatives. That is where the danger lies, and it is unfolding before our eyes. But I must stress the greatest tragedy of all is that this crisis is not inevitable. It is the product of decisions to cut taxes for the wealthy, to deregulate industries, to dismantle unions, to underfund schools, and to treat healthcare as a commodity rather than a human right. Every one of these choices has weakened the bond between the state and its people. If we continue down this path, we are heading toward a society defined not by shared prosperity, but by division and despair. If, however, we confront this reality with honesty and courage, we can still repair the contract. We can still ensure that the promise of America, the promise of fairness, opportunity, and dignity for all does not die but is renewed. America's foreign policy has entered a dangerous cycle, one that prioritizes confrontation over cooperation and rivalry over diplomacy. The United States has chosen time and again to view the world through the lens of domination rather than partnership, and the consequences of this choice are mounting. Instead of focusing on building peace, strengthening alliances through respect, and addressing the urgent global challenges of our time, we continue to pour resources into military posturing and endless conflicts. The great irony is that in the pursuit of security through force, we have made ourselves less secure. What we are experiencing is not just the strain of overstretched resources, but the weakening of our moral authority, the erosion of trust, and the alienation of partners who might otherwise stand with us in shaping a stable future. The real question is this: how long can America continue to maintain a foreign policy built on confrontation without facing the backlash of exhaustion, instability, and decline? The relationship with China is perhaps the clearest example of this self-defeating pattern. For years, instead of embracing the opportunity to cooperate with the world's second largest economy on shared challenges like climate change, global trade stability, and technological advancement, Washington has chosen to escalate tensions. Tariffs, sanctions, military maneuvers, and hostile rhetoric dominate the agenda. Yet consider this: China is not going away, nor is it shrinking. It is growing larger, more powerful, and increasingly influential in global affairs. To frame this relationship as a zero-sum contest is to ignore the reality that the challenges of the 21st century, climate change, pandemics, cyber security, cannot be solved without collaboration. By turning cooperation into confrontation, the United States risks not only economic fallout, but also geopolitical isolation. The hook that should shake us awake is this: if we continue to treat China solely as an enemy, we are not only undermining peace, but also jeopardizing our own prosperity. Then there's Russia, where decades of mistrust and escalation have left the world teetering on the edge of catastrophic miscalculation. The war in Ukraine, rather than serving as a rallying point for long-term peace efforts, has instead been used to justify further militarization, larger defense budgets, and more aggressive posturing. But what is the end game? Do we believe that sanctions and weapons alone will solve the crisis? Or do we acknowledge the painful truth that wars end not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table? A foreign policy that ignores diplomacy in favor of confrontation is not a strategy. It is a gamble with human lives at stake. The tragedy here is not only the suffering of millions abroad, but the massive diversion of resources from urgent domestic needs. For every billion spent on missiles, there are schools left underfunded, bridges left to decay, and families left without health care. The Middle East offers another cautionary tale. Decades of interventions from Iraq to Afghanistan to Libya have cost trillions of dollars and countless lives, yet the region remains unstable. America's reputation has suffered, our credibility questioned, and our presence resented. Each military intervention was justified in the name of security, but what security has truly been achieved? Instead, we see the rise of extremist groups, humanitarian disasters, and widespread mistrust of U.S. intentions. And yet, policymakers continue to speak the language of dominance as if repeating the same failed strategy will somehow produce a different outcome. This is the dangerous loop we are trapped in. Confrontation breeds instability. Instability breeds further confrontation, and the cycle never ends. The hook that should be impossible to ignore is that while we remain locked in these confrontations, the world is moving on. Nations in Asia, Africa, Latin America are forming new alliances, often without U.S. participation, and looking toward alternative centers of power. The rise of multipolarity means America can no longer dictate the rules of the global order. If we cling to the illusion that we will find ourselves increasingly isolated, our influence diminished, and our economy weakened. The greatest danger of confrontation-driven foreign policy is not only the risk of war, but also the steady erosion of America's leadership role in the world. What makes this even more alarming is that these choices are not forced upon us by fate. They are deliberate. They are the product of a mindset in Washington that equates strength with military dominance and diplomacy with weakness. Yet history tells us the opposite. The greatest victories of American foreign policy, the rebuilding of Europe after World War II, the arms control agreements of the Cold War, the creation of global institutions like the United Nations, were not achieved by confrontation, but by vision, dialogue, and compromise. That history should serve as a guidepost, yet we have strayed dangerously far from it. If we continue down this road, the costs will not only be counted in military budgets or diplomatic failures, the costs will be paid by ordinary Americans whose communities are deprived of the investments that endless wars consume. They will be paid by future generations who inherit a world less safe, less stable, and less cooperative. They will be paid by all of us as the great challenges of our era, climate, health, inequality, go unaddressed because we are too busy fighting battles that diplomacy could prevent. The truth is stark. A foreign policy built on confrontation is a foreign policy that leads not to security, but to exhaustion. The United States must recognize this before it is too late, or else the very power we seek to preserve will be the first casualty of our own miscalculations. The climate emergency is no longer a distant problem to be debated by experts in academic halls or discussed in political campaigns as if it were a choice on the ballot. It is here, it is real, and it is unfolding with a speed and ferocity that should leave no one in doubt about the scale of the danger. The fires, floods, hurricanes, and droughts that we are witnessing are not anomalies or unfortunate natural events. They are the predictable outcome of decades of ignoring science and failing to take decisive action. The United States, as one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases and one of the most powerful nations in the world, cannot escape responsibility. Yet, instead of mobilizing with urgency, we continue to act as if incremental changes will be enough to avert catastrophe. The hook that should grip every citizen is this: climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is a national security threat, a public health crisis, and an economic time bomb waiting to explode. When wildfires consume entire towns, when hurricanes flatten communities, and when floods destroy farmland, the consequences ripple far beyond the immediate destruction. Families are displaced, infrastructure collapses, economies falter, and governments are forced to divert resources to emergency relief instead of long-term development. Consider the billions of dollars already spent on disaster response in just the past decade. How sustainable is a system where more money is spent rebuilding after each catastrophe than on preventing the next one? This is not a theoretical question, it is a pressing reality. And yet, year after year, America spends more on weapons of war than on protecting its own people from the far more certain devastation of climate change. The imbalance is staggering, and it reveals the dangerous short-sightedness of our current priorities. The security implications of climate change are profound. Rising sea levels threaten to displace millions from coastal cities, not only abroad, but within the United States itself. The potential for mass migration, both internally and globally, is staggering, and with it comes political instability and humanitarian crisis that no border wall or military force can contain. Food insecurity, driven by droughts and shifting weather patterns, threatens to inflame conflict in already fragile regions, conflicts that inevitably draw on the United States. The Pentagon itself has described climate change as a threat multiplier, yet the political system remains paralyzed, treating it as a secondary issue rather than the central challenge of our age. The hook here is unavoidable. Climate change will destabilize societies more thoroughly than any rival nation ever could, and unless we act, it will do so within our lifetimes. Public health is another dimension of this emergency. The spread of vector-borne diseases as temperatures rise, the health impacts of polluted air, and the psychological toll of repeated climate disasters are already being felt. Children are growing up breathing toxic air, farmers are struggling under relentless heat waves, and seniors are increasingly vulnerable during climate-driven disasters. These are not future scenarios, they are today's news stories. To ignore them is to betray not only science, but also the duty of any responsible government to protect its citizens. Yet our policies remain piecemeal, fragmented, and too often captured by the influence of powerful industries determined to protect short-term profits at the expense of long-term survival. And what of the economy? Far from being a burden, addressing the climate crisis could unleash the greatest wave of innovation and job creation since the Industrial Revolution. Investments in renewable energy, clean technology, sustainable infrastructure, and climate-resilient agriculture are not just about saving the planet, they are about building the economy of the future. Yet America hesitates, clinging to outdated energy systems and subsidizing industries that should have been phased out decades ago. The result is that other nations, particularly in Europe and Asia, are racing ahead in the green economy while the United States risks falling behind. The cost of inaction is not only environmental collapse, but also economic decline. The real hook is that by failing to lead, we are squandering an opportunity to shape the industries and technologies that will define the 21st century. The most dangerous illusion is to think we still have endless time. Every year of delay locks in more damage, more warming, and more irreversible consequences. The window for action is closing, and once it closes, no amount of money, technology, or political will can reopen it. The reality is stark. Climate change will not wait for our politics to mature or for our leaders to find courage. It is advancing with or without us, and the only choice we have is whether to confront it now or to face its full wrath later. The American people must recognize this not as a distant scientific debate, but as a present danger to their homes, their families, and their future. The truth is that climate change is the defining security challenge of our time, and ignoring it is not only reckless, it is suicidal. The American economy today projects an image of resilience, with headlines boasting of strong GDP numbers, stock markets hitting record highs, and unemployment rates that seem historically low. But beneath this polished surface lies a far more fragile reality: an economy weighed down by unsustainable debt, rampant speculation, deep structural inequality, and a financial system that has repeatedly proven incapable of self-regulation. What the public is rarely told is that much of this growth is built on shaky foundations. The hook that every American should confront is this: we are living in a moment eerily reminiscent of past crises, from the Great Depression to the 2008 financial meltdown, and unless we act decisively, history is poised to repeat itself with devastating consequences. One of the most glaring vulnerabilities is the mountain of debt that has engulfed households, corporations, and even the government. Household debt, driven by student loans, medical bills, and credit card borrowing, traps millions of families in a cycle of financial insecurity. Corporations, lured by years of artificially low interest rates, have gorged themselves on borrowing, often not to invest productively, but to buy back their own stock and inflate shareholder returns. And the federal government, despite record revenues, continues to run massive deficits that future generations will be forced to shoulder. Debt can fuel growth when it is tied to long-term investment, but when it is used merely to paper over structural weaknesses or create illusions of prosperity, it becomes a ticking time bomb. The hook here is that much of America's apparent prosperity is leverage borrowed and unsustainable. Speculation is another fault line that threatens the economy's stability. Wall Street continues to thrive on financial engineering, exotic derivatives, and short-term profiteering rather than investments that create real value. We saw in 2008 what happens when speculation runs wild. Millions lost their homes, pensions evaporated, and the global economy was brought to its knees. Yet remarkably, more than a decade later, the lessons have not been learned. Banks are bigger than ever, financial products more complex, and regulation remains weak under the relentless pressure of lobbyists who treat oversight as an obstacle to profit. The danger is clear. The next collapse may not look exactly like 2008, but the same reckless behavior is once again embedded deep within the system. The illusion of a healthy economy is further shattered when we consider the widening gap between Wall Street and Main Street. Stock markets may soar, but for ordinary Americans, wages remain stagnant, job security is precarious, and the cost of living rises faster than paychecks. The Federal Reserve's policies of quantitative easing and near zero interest rates have inflated asset values, disproportionately benefiting the wealthy, while leaving working families to struggle with soaring rents, healthcare bills, and student debt. In other words, the so-called economic recovery has not been shared. The hook that should strike every citizen is this: the prosperity you hear about in the news is not your prosperity. It belongs to a tiny elite that has captured the lion's share of the gains. This inequality is not just an ethical issue, it is a systemic risk. Economies cannot remain stable when wealth is concentrated so narrowly, when vast segments of the population lack purchasing power, and when entire communities are left behind. History shows us that societies built on extreme inequality are not only unjust but unstable. Discontent breeds polarization, polarization breeds dysfunction, and dysfunction eventually feeds economic decline. The very fabric of the American dream, the belief that hard work will be rewarded with upward mobility, is unraveling when ordinary people see that no matter how hard they work, they cannot get ahead. Faith in the system collapses. That collapse of trust is not only social, it is economic, because confidence is the foundation of markets. The hook we must confront is that the fragility of our economy is not hidden. It is visible in plain sight. It is visible in the hollowing out of manufacturing towns, in the explosion of gig work without benefits, in the skyrocketing homelessness in cities of immense wealth. It is visible in the fact that nearly half of Americans cannot afford an unexpected 400 expense. And yet, policymakers continue to celebrate aggregate growth numbers as if averages can mask the suffering of millions. The reality is that this fragility will not remain invisible forever. It will erupt, as it has before, in the form of financial crashes, social unrest, or political upheaval. The tragedy is that alternatives exist. With smarter regulation of financial markets, with fairer tax policies, with genuine investment in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and clean energy, the economy could be both prosperous and resilient. But instead, America remains addicted to a model that prizes short-term profit over long-term stability. The financial sector, which should serve as the circulatory system of the economy, has instead become its parasite, extracting wealth without creating it. Unless this imbalance is corrected, the system will eventually collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The American people deserve to know the truth. The economy is not as strong as it appears. Beneath the glowing reports and celebratory rhetoric lies a fragile structure that could unravel quickly if shocks, geopolitical conflict, climate disasters, or financial contagion strike simultaneously. The hook is stark. If we fail to reform, the next crisis will not just be a repeat of 2008. It will be worse because inequality is deeper, debt is higher, and the political system is even less capable of responding. The question is not whether the reckoning will come, but when, and whether we will be prepared when it does. America today faces not only economic strain and foreign policy missteps, but also a deep political fracture that is paralyzing its ability to respond to crisis. Political polarization has grown so severe that the basic functions of governance are increasingly compromised. Congress is gridlocked, public trust in government is at historic lows, and the political culture itself has become poisoned by misinformation, anger, and division. The hook that should alarm every citizen is that this dysfunction is no longer just a matter of partisan bickering. It has become a genuine threat to national security. A country divided against itself cannot lead the world, cannot solve its domestic problems, and cannot safeguard democracy. The rise of polarization did not happen overnight. For decades, political leaders, media outlets, and interest groups have learned to thrive on division, exploiting fear and resentment rather than building consensus. Instead of encouraging debate rooted in facts, we have cultivated a culture of outrage where winning is valued more than governing. The result is that bipartisan cooperation, once the foundation of major achievements in American history, is now treated as weakness or betrayal. Legislation that could address critical issues such as healthcare reform, climate change, or infrastructure investment stalls endlessly, not because solutions are impossible, but because compromise has become politically toxic. The dysfunction is structural, and its costs are borne not by politicians, but by ordinary citizens who watch as urgent problems go unresolved. The media landscape has made this worse, fragmenting the public into ideological silos. Social media platforms amplify misinformation at unprecedented speed, creating echo chambers where people are less likely to encounter opposing views and more likely to believe outright falsehoods. Political leaders exploit this environment, weaponizing disinformation to deepen division and rally their bases. When millions of Americans cannot even agree on basic facts about elections, public health, or foreign policy, how can a democracy function? The hook here is undeniable. Truth itself is under siege, And without a shared reality, governance becomes impossible. The consequences are not confined to rhetoric or partisan theater. They translate into real vulnerabilities. A polarized political system is slow to respond to crises, whether financial shocks, natural disasters, or pandemics. The COVID-19 pandemic offered a painful demonstration. Instead of uniting around science and common sense, America's response fractured along partisan lines, costing hundreds of thousands of lives and exposing the inability of its political institutions to mobilize effectively. The lesson is clear. Polarization does not only paralyze governance, it kills. And as new crises emerge, from climate disasters to global economic instability, this dysfunction magnifies the risks America faces. Even more alarming is the way polarization undermines faith in democracy itself. When large portions of the population believe elections are rigged, when politicians openly question the legitimacy of democratic institutions, and when violence becomes a language of politics, democracy stands on fragile ground. The January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of a deeper illness, one that grows when trust collapses and division hardens into hatred. History shows us that democracies do not die overnight. They wither slowly as citizens lose faith in leaders, exploit division for power. The hook that should keep us awake is that America is not immune to this process. It is already unfolding. Polarization also erodes America's standing in the world. Allies see a country too divided to sustain coherent policies, shifting course dramatically with every election. Adversaries see an opportunity to exploit America's internal divisions, spreading disinformation and sowing discord to weaken its resolve. A nation that cannot govern itself effectively loses credibility as a global leader. The dysfunction of American politics, in other words, is not only a domestic challenge, it is an international vulnerability. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is that solutions exist, yet the very polarization that creates the problem blocks the remedies. Reforms to campaign finance, voting rights protections, media accountability, and civic education could strengthen democracy and reduce division. But such measures require political courage, and courage is scarce in a system where short-term partisan gain outweighs long-term national interest. The American people are left with a government that lurches from crisis to crisis, incapable of strategic action. The reality is stark. Political polarization is no longer just about Republicans versus Democrats. It is about whether the United States can still function as a democracy, whether it can still deliver solutions to its citizens, and whether it can still lead in a rapidly changing world. The hook is simple but devastating. If America cannot fix its internal dysfunction, it will not survive as the democracy it claims to be. The danger is not abstract, not distant. It is here, it is now, and it is eroding the nation from within. The crisis confronting the United States, economic fragility, political dysfunction, climate emergency, and global confrontation all point to one unavoidable truth. What America needs most is leadership of a very different kind than what it has grown accustomed to. Leadership today cannot mean simply commanding armies, repeating slogans, or scoring points in partisan battles. It must mean the ability to tell the truth even when it is uncomfortable, to build bridges where division dominates, and to inspire a vision that goes beyond the next election cycle. The hook that Americans must grasp is this: without courageous and empathetic leadership rooted in honesty, the nation will not only drift aimlessly, but collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The first quality of such leadership must be truth telling. For too long, the American public has been fed illusions that endless wars will make us secure, that tax cuts for the wealthy will create prosperity for all, that climate change can be ignored without consequence, that our democracy is unshakable no matter how divided we become. These are not truths, they are convenient myths repeated to maintain power and avoid accountability. Real leadership begins with stripping away those illusions and leveling with the American people about the seriousness of the challenges ahead. Honesty is not a weakness in leadership, it is its foundation. Without it, trust crumbles, and without trust, no leader can hope to guide a nation. The second quality is empathy, the capacity to see and feel the struggles of ordinary citizens. America's leaders have grown far too distant from the people they claim to serve. They measure success in stock market gains, while families measure it in whether they can afford rent and groceries. They boast of GDP growth while millions live paycheck to paycheck. True leadership requires closing this gap not only by understanding the struggles of ordinary Americans, but by placing their needs at the center of national priorities. The hook here is that unless leaders reconnect with the lived reality of the people, they will govern a country that increasingly feels abandoned and betrayed. Leadership also means investing in the future rather than mortgaging it. The greatest test of leadership is whether a nation's children inherit a country stronger, fairer, and safer than the one their parents knew. Yet America is currently on track to leave its young people a planet ravaged by climate change, an economy burdened by debt and inequality, and a political system too dysfunctional to solve problems. This is not leadership, it is abdication. What is needed is a commitment to long-term investments in renewable energy, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and technology, the pillars of a sustainable and competitive society. Such investments are not expenses, they are the building blocks of a future worth inheriting. The hook every parent should hear is this: without courageous leadership, now your children will inherit decline, not progress. On the global stage, leadership must move away from domination and toward cooperation. The 21st century is not defined by a single superpower shaping the world, but by interdependence among nations facing common threats. Pandemics, climate change, cybersecurity, and global inequality cannot be solved through military might or zero-sum rivalry. They demand coalitions, diplomacy, and shared responsibility. Leadership means recognizing that America's strength will come not from how many wars it can fight, but from how many partnerships it can build. To cling to the outdated notion of unilateral dominance is to set America on a path of isolation and weakness. The hook here is undeniable. If America insists on leading alone, it will not lead at all. Finally, leadership requires moral courage, the willingness to act not for applause, not for political gain, but for what is right. Too often, decisions are made with an eye on polling numbers and campaign donations rather than the long-term health of the country. Real leaders take risks, truths, and sometimes lose popularity in the short term because they are working for the greater good. America has had such leaders in its past, and history remembers them not for their convenience, but for their courage. At this moment, when the stakes are so high, the need for such courage is greater than ever. The United States stands at a crossroads. One path leads to continued dysfunction, decline, and crisis, fueled by leaders who serve themselves and their donors. The other path requires a new vision of leadership, grounded in truth, empathy, foresight, cooperation, and courage. The choice is not abstract, it is immediate. The hook that must resonate with every American is this: without such leadership, every other problem, inequality, climate, polarization, fragile economy, global tensions, will remain unsolved, because only leadership can mobilize the will to change. The future of America depends not on chance, but on the leaders it chooses and the qualities it demands of them.